Let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
I can't hear that enough. Joe Scarborough, worse than we thought. Joe Biden's brain essentially not functioning for 4 years, and the details of his incompetence show a White House without a president. The party has told you the laptop wasn't real. They told you that Russia got Trump elected. They told you that Joe Biden was the best version of himself. Does anyone believe anything any Democrat tells them?
Number 2.
The problem is it's asking conservatives like myself to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. That's historic. No one's ever raised the debt ceiling that much. It's really a slap in the face.
Big bill and big trouble. Republicans having trouble mixing tax reduction with deficit reduction while adhering to Trump's campaign promises. We'll explain what they're up against.
Number 1.
I'm not in the habit of praising Donald Trump, but I got to tell you, the last week or so in the Middle East, I think the president has in this last week or so played the Middle East pretty darn well. I got to give him some kudos there.
I can't believe I'm saying this, and that's Congressman John Himes. And the Democrat praising the Republican president, that to me is totally stunning. The most productive overseas trip of any president in my lifetime. We bring home $2.7 trillion in pledges for investment. Even if it's close to that, when people actually write the checks, it'll be impressive. Along the way, makes a big move in meeting with the former terrorist, we hope former, and current president of Syria, and says, I'll relieve sanctions for a few months to see how you do. And then Ukraine and Russia met in Turkey, but Vladimir Putin stands us up. Keep in mind, Vladimir Putin called for one-on-one talks and then didn't show. Trump has given him some cover saying he's only going to show if I show and I'll handle it from here. But when I was telling you about the overseas trip, I'm talking about $200 billion in commercial deals with the U.S. and UAE, $243.5 billion in economic deals with the U.S. and Qatar, and $600 billion commitment from Saudi Arabia to invest in the United States and the removal of longtime sanctions against Syria, at least temporarily, if they do certain things. So what does this mean? It means they're buying a lot of military hardware. It also means they want to get into the AI business. Now, for us, we want to box out China, and we did. If we can actually make a deal with Syria, and they end up legitimately trying to stand up a country while preserving the rights of Christians and other religious sects, which has been known for their intolerance, and the Kurds, we will box and just demand that Russia get their base out of Syria. We'll box them right out of the Middle East and box China out of being the AI leaders in the area. And that's one thing. We got to worry about the security of our chips, but the NVIDIA CEO is there to cut the deal. Worry about AI and power. You got Joe Lonsdale making the trip, and you also have David Sachs, who's head of AI, Elon Musk, who's got his own AI division, as is Sam Altman. Pretty impressive. Now, look, if I say positive things about Trump on his trip, that's not that unique on this show. I mean, but if I tell you that these Democrats were as impressed as I was, that would be unique. And I'm telling you, here's an example. Ben Rhodes, former deputy national security advisor under President Obama. Cut 4.
I don't like Trump's motivations for lots of things he does. But one thing you will say is he's not tied to this constant fear of some
bad faith right-wing attacks.
Yeah, bad faith right-wing attacks or kind of stupid, blob type, we don't do this, so we must leverage the sanctions for blah, 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 No, sometimes you just have to try something different. And continuing to sanction a country because of the sanctions you put in place for the dictator who's no longer there makes no sense.
That's what he's talking about, Assad in Syria. Now, look, people on the ground there are saying that they like what happened. And the foreign minister of Syria, who just got there, met with Rubio in Turkey. Rubio mapped out exactly what has to happen. And to me, one of the things that happens when you have personal relationships that you trust, you use those relationships. Sometimes you ask for favors. Now, the favor that the Turkish leader, who is just a terrible guy, but he's a NATO member, and dealing with him squarely is to our advantage. Ignoring him doesn't work. Trump built a hotel when Erdogan was president of Turkey. They know each other. So Erdogan and the Crown Prince is doing all this investment in the U.S. Said, listen, would you relieve some sanctions? Would you meet with the president of Syria? He's trying to stop chaos from breaking out. And my goodness, he kicked out Iran and he's about to kick out Russia. What's the downside? And Trump said, let him come. And he came and met. And look, I'm not saying, he said, one of the things I got to do is have the Abraham Accords, which means you have commerce and you have a vow of peace with Israel, who just took out Mohammed Sinwar by all accounts. This is progress, and this is change. Can you believe I'm talking about the Middle East and not talking about war or oil? But important, gas is dropping to around, oil is dropping to around $60 a barrel. That is important because it's not a lot. And when you bring down the price of oil, you bring down the revenue that Iran and Russia needs to survive. So when it comes down, it helps. If you look at the Crown Prince and say, be kind of helpful, OPEC produced a little bit more, because we'll produce a little bit more, flood the market, kind of helpful. Don't have to make a big announcement about it. Here's Annie Linsky on Special Report last night, Cut 6.
What's remarkable, I think, about this trip is, the ease that Trump is displaying when he is dealing with these Gulf leaders. And he clearly has a sort of they have a sort of similar approach towards deal making, a more transactional approach than perhaps he has than the European leaders are used to having with an American president. So it's a really good place for him to have this first big trip.
Yeah, it's a really good trip, and we'll see what happens. What I think is going to happen next is I think Trump is going to fly out, and I think he's going to end up meeting. I think he's going to end up meeting with Putin one-on-one, because he said that, and he had a chance to really trash Putin and just say he called for this meeting. I urged Zelensky to go to this meeting, and then you make me look bad, Vladimir Putin, by not showing up to the meeting. You realize things could get a lot worse for you. Does he not fully understand that? Marco Rubio from Turkey, where he was hoping that Putin would show up, Cut 39.
I think he said publicly today that the only way we're going to have a breakthrough here, nothing's going to happen at this point. Given everything we know after months of working on this, nothing's going to happen until President Trump sits across the table from Vladimir Putin and puts it on the line and puts it on the table. I think that's the only chance we have at peace at this point, given everything we've seen over the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's just a joke. They send mid-level people to show up to negotiate. Well, Zelensky was actually in Turkey and then left when Putin didn't show. I want to get the perspective of Dennis Ross, who is the William Davidson Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Studies and author of the book Stagecraft 2.0, What America Needs to Lead a Multipolar World. Ambassador, welcome back.
Always good to be with you, Brian.
Your thoughts about what we just watched for the last 4 days?
Well, I think we saw Donald Trump being Donald Trump in terms of how he views his priorities in foreign policy. His first trip in 2017 was to Saudi Arabia. His first foreign trip now, excluding the trip to the Vatican for the Pope's funeral, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. His priority in foreign policy is very much connected to how he defines America's economy and what he wants to do when it comes to it. So this was very much focused on building deeper economic partnerships with these states, producing investments for American companies in the UAE and Saudi Arabia in particular, but also Saudi and Emirati investments in the U.S. and Qatar doing the biggest buy ever of Boeing aircraft. So this was not a geopolitical trip. This was not a security architecture trip. This was a trip geared towards focusing very heavily on how he's going to try to serve American economic interests as he defines them. And the numbers that he is bringing home, truth is, I think there'll ultimately be a gap between what's been announced and what's delivered, but it'd still be significant. To be fair, also, a lot of what was done, the Saudi and the UAE in particular, a lot of it was done by people working for Biden in the last year preparing the round, especially on AI, where they were focusing on what should be the technology transfer rules so that what we're providing them in terms of chips and semiconductors, which is the cutting edge technology shaping everything for the future, doesn't somehow gain access, or the Chinese gain access to it. But the truth is, he's the one who's finalizing these deals, and now we'll see how well ultimately they begin to materialize.
I'll tell you, Silicon Valley couldn't have been more unhappy with the Biden administration. I've talked to David Sachs. I've talked to Joe Lonsdale, and they are Democrats by their whole life, and they felt totally shut down, and that the administration didn't understand it, and they were looking to limit their growth. And for him to go over there to talk about building energy infrastructure while walking off with defense contracts, which I worry about them being able to fulfill, I think is pretty impressive. Here is the UAE Foreign Affairs Minister, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, cut 3.
It works because your nation has been so open for business, and we've learned from you. We've been investing in the United States for decades, but now we're taking it one step further, not only in terms of size, but in terms of trust, and we're grateful for President Trump for that.
But the security is a real element. They have to make sure that those chips don't end up in Chinese hands. They also, in terms of technology, the same thing. So there's a trust, but there's got to be security aspects to it. But when you look at the Gulf states and the Abraham Accords, you know what's next. It's going to be the non-Gulf, Iran, the Shia nation, Persian, who want to have a nuclear weapon, and nobody else wants them to. Where do you think, what do your sources say this deal is going to look like, or do you think there's no deal at all coming down between the U.S. and Iran?
I do think there's a deal because they need it, and clearly President Trump wants it. So between the need and the want, you're likely to find a midpoint. Now, the question is, what's an acceptable midpoint? I've said it to you before, Brian. The only acceptable outcome is an outcome where the Iranians give up the option of having a nuclear weapon. The president talks about they won't have a nuclear weapon. They don't have one today. So the question is, what is it that you have to change so that they don't have a nuclear weapon option? There are three different ways to do it. One, which is they don't have an enrichment capability. Two, is that you change the structure of their nuclear infrastructure. You dramatically reduce it from what it is, and you reduce it to the point where they could have a limited number of centrifuges for research purposes only, but the size would be so small that by definition they would be signaling a change in intent. Three, you could allow them to enrich, but not anything that they enrich has to be immediately shipped out of the country, and what they get in return are the fuel rods. When you're doing enrichment, you can do one of two things with it. You can turn it into fuel to power a nuclear reactor to generate electricity, or you turn it into the core of a bomb. If they are allowed to enrich and keep what they're enriching in Iran, they can definitely turn it into the core of a bomb. If they have to ship out everything they enrich to get the fuel rods, then they don't have what it takes to create the core of a bomb. So there's three different ways to produce what I'm saying. Is it possible to produce that with the Iranians? Yes, provided they understand that the alternative is going to be, we will destroy the nuclear infrastructure they have developed over the last 40 years at the cost of more than $500 billion. They have to know it would be entirely destroyed. If they know that's the alternative, then I suspect that you can produce an agreement along the lines of one of those three pathways I just outlined.
So it looks like the talks, a senior Trump official said a more positive assessment of their 3-hour talks. The Iranians not as positive. But the other thing that you know better than anyone, Dennis, is they have to stop financing these proxy groups, fomenting terror in the region, corrupting Iraq. We know what they're doing with Hamas and Hezbollah in and around Israel, if they're able to stand them back up. The Houthi rebels are definitely a force that Israel's dealing with right now, even though, at least for this moment, they're not trying to shut down any of the waterways. So we have to find a way to do that. And I just don't know if this regime would ever not finance them. And also, they can't use ballistic missiles because that's how they would deliver their nuclear weapons. I mean, UAE cannot enrich uranium in their country, but they have nuclear power.
You're right. No, look, that's why, what you're describing is a package that ensures that they give up a nuclear weapon option, a package that makes it clear that there can no longer be support for their proxies. At least there can't be any kind of military support for them. And lastly, they can't be developing long-range ballistic missiles that are a delivery vehicle for nuclear weapons. So can you produce all that in agreement? My guess is no, even with what I was saying, but I could envision, for example, an agreement that of the sort I was describing earlier, in which the administration also conveys in a letter to the Iranians what will happen if we see them providing any support militarily to any of the proxy groups, if we see them providing monies that they're getting from sanctions relief to the proxy groups, and if we see them developing a ballistic missile with a capability of a certain range. And then we would have to spell out, here's what the consequences would be, and those have to be very clear, not just in terms of economic penalties, but military penalties.
And the thing that bothers me is they'll get their missile defense back and be able to rebuild a lot of what was blown up by the Israelis after they attacked the Israelis. Real quick, on Syria, do you agree with the president's decision to temporarily relieve sanctions on that government and for the president to have that meeting?
2 quick points. First, on that one, yes, I do agree. I mean, you should test this every step of the way, but if there's a possibility for a very different Syria with Iran now out of it, we should do what we can to see if that can be developed. The other, I agree completely with you. There is a window here. If the Iranians are given time and money, that's a problem with the framework agreement. If they're given time and money, they will rebuild that air defense. And then you lose the opportunity to take out, or at least you raise the cost of acting against it militarily. And they will not feel as vulnerable as they do right now. That vulnerability is what's creating their need.
Exactly. When they feared that we were going to go into Iran after Iraq is when they were the most compliant. But we let that window close. Dennis Ross, thanks so much. An exciting time in the Middle East.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
So Tomi Lahren is here, and Tomi's doing Outnumbered at the top of the hour. You know she's host of OutKicks. Tomi Lahren is fearless. And Tomi, just real quick, I went a little long in the segment, but I want to get you to weigh in on this overseas trip. I'm stunned by how much sound I have of Democrats who seem impressed with what Trump pulled off. What did you think?
I think they have to. They have to acknowledge it. And some, though, they'd rather talk about the Diddy trial. So if you turn on the other networks, it's like they don't want to give too much credit, and it's like full Diddy coverage, which is important. We're covering it, too. But, you know, earlier in the week, it was the jet from Qatar. That was the big distraction. And then the Diddy trial, and now they're having to give a little bit of credit where credit is due. It will be short-lived. You can bet on that.
Right. Unless he stays on a roll. And as I just watched Chris Kaliza on the other channel, and they do actually on our channel, rolled in from his podcast. He says he's never seen the Democrats in his career in such disarray. What about you? How do you feel about it?
Well, let's look at what they're going through right now at the DNC. Look at poor little David Hogg, right? He didn't meet the gender balance. They're tossing him out.
They're tossing out his election result where he was the number 2 because he wasn't white, because he was too white.
Well, he's too male, I guess, which is weird to me, Brian, because I thought you could be anything that you wanted to be. And the whole DNC protocol was that they had men, women, they had non-binary. So I don't know why he doesn't just identify as something else. But he tried to shake up the party. He wants younger voices, more passionate voices. That's not going to help him, but at least it gives some excitement. And they're tossing him out because he's not gender balanced enough. So the Democrats, they continue to impress us. Van Hollen is still upset that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, he's the only one that's still beating that drum.
He's still doing that?
Well, he's got to, though.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in so deep. He has to go the distance.
He did every Sunday show bragging about that. Well, I'm not saying he's a great guy. He just should come back here, really. And now we have 2 human trafficking. We have a guy they just dug out of prison that said he worked for me as a human trafficker. He'd be the one driving, picking up. Do you know that?
And they're very upset. Speaking of that, going down in Tennessee, they're very upset that ICE is in Tennessee. ICE is in Nashville and has been for the last couple of weeks, taking a lot of criminal aliens off the streets. And of course, our mayor, he wants to set up a belonging fund for illegal immigrants and their families to help offset the costs of them being deported, rightfully so. So there's a lot going on in Tennessee right now, too. But they are messing with the wrong state. We're pretty red. We quite literally voted for this.
I'm pretty sure that's some of the stupidest things I've seen since what's happening in Newark, New Jersey, where you're rallying outside a perfectly fine facility for murderers and rapists. More Tomi Lahren in a moment.
not in the habit of praising Donald Trump, but I got to tell you, the last week or so in the Middle East, I think the president has in this last week or so played the Middle East pretty darn well. I got to give him some kudos there.
And he did that, and I could play Ben Rhodes too, Obama National Security Advisor. He did a lot of the great moves, and I'm being sarcastic, that Barack Obama did. Remember, Barack Obama gave us the Libya mess. He also was the idea that after the surge, he thought it would be a great idea to pull every one of our troops out of Iraq, and then we got ISIS. Ben Rhodes was behind that, but he says, I got to give Trump credit for going out of the box and not being locked into a doctrine. Tomi Lahren still with us. You know about her show on OutKick. She is fearless, and she's about to go on Outnumbered. Are your thoughts about these guys weighing in? Do you feel the same way?
I feel the same way, but I also think being associated with the Democrat Party right now, if you are a serious strategist or individual that wants to have a career, being associated with the Democrat Party right now is toxic. It's poison. So maybe giving President Trump some credit is their way of subtly distancing themselves from that. And also, they'd rather talk about Trump's success in the Middle East rather than talking about the Biden tell-all books, because a lot of them are going to be swept up in that. So if you're a strategist, you're a Democrat elite in that circle, you'd rather be giving Trump credit than talking about how you covered up Joe Biden's decline, in my opinion.
You know what's so interesting, Tomi? The disconnect. Do you remember after he collapsed in the debate, what did they do? They scheduled like a whole week of appearances, speeches, one-on-one interviews with Stephanopoulos and 2 or 3 others. They thought he could work his way out of it. But every single interview, huge flaws. Stephanopoulos would say later, gutlessly, and say it was sad interviewing him. Now they say these bad books are coming out. So let's put him forward. 2 appearances, the BBC and The View. Did it help?
It didn't help, and I think Democrats are really hoping that Joe stays home. But he's not going to, because I still don't think that Joe fully recognizes his own decline.
But does Jill?
She absolutely does. Clay Travis and I were talking about this a lot, and we've both been discussing it. But if this is what his advisors were seeing and the people in his inner circle, what was Jill seeing? That's evil. That's
Absolutely.
Evil that you allowed that to happen to your husband.
My hunch, Hunter and Jill were running the country. I really believe
that's a horrifying thought.
When you find out the cabinet was locked out and the secretaries were locked, that's what they're saying, unnamed. But you say that they couldn't get access to him. Who else has access to him?
I think they kept it a real tight-knit circle, but we could see it. This is what's annoying me this week the most, is that these media members now are saying, well, we were lied to. Well, then how come all of us could detect it? You guys are supposed to be journalists and you couldn't see that there was decline there unless the White House told you there was decline? Like, where was your natural intellectual curiosity or just your ability to see and hear?
How about this? Cut 35.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever. Not a close second. And I've known him for years. The Brzezinskis have known him for 50 years. If it weren't the truth, I wouldn't say it.
What do you say to that? F you if you don't believe it. F really? Oh, thank you.
How do these people still have jobs?
I don't know. Why would you listen to whatever he says after that?
Well, it was a big lie to the American people, and the American people are quite sick of the lies. Now we're learning more and more about COVID. Okay, we were lied to a lot there. We were lied to about Joe, and all these members of the media now coming out saying, oh, well, we're going to get to the bottom of it now, and maybe we should have looked into this a little bit more. It's shocking that they still have time on the airwaves, Brian.
What about this? Jake Sullivan, in his book, he wasn't recognized. The National Security Advisor wasn't recognized. Listen to his response here. Cut 30.
You never witnessed this thing that all these aides are talking about to these journalists, that sometimes he would just sort of fade away. You never witnessed that.
I could just tell you my own personal experience. I cannot speak on behalf of aides, unnamed people, and I can't speak on behalf of what folks reacted to when they saw him operating in public. All I can do is tell you my experience with him, and that's what I've done.
Cut 29.
There's actually an excerpt in the book where it says he forgot your name in December 2022. He called you Steve a couple of times. Did that happen?
I do not recall that ever happening, and I will tell you, Joe Biden knows my name. He knows my name.
Wait a second. Steve who? I'm like, who do you think he was?
But the rationalizations, and this is still going on for those who are not being completely forthright.
Right.
Their biggest defense of him was he stood up today, and Jill on The View, he put in a full day, guys, and then even sometimes at night he was doing a little more.
Wow.
And that's their biggest thing is, well, he usually remembered my name, and every time I saw him, he was breathing. And they want us to applaud that he was able to function.
Right. So here's the thing. The Russia investigation, we know that was a big hoax for 2.5 years. And then when the Mueller report comes out, they change gears. And then we know about COVID when it came out. Now we find out what was going on behind the scenes. Perhaps HHS is more complicit than anybody else. But then we find out about the laptop. Remember in 2020, if you brought up the laptop, in fact, we have that. Chuck Todd talking about people and the laptop. But if you brought up the laptop, you're a conspiracy theorist. And then 6 months later, the New York Times goes, the laptop is real. We knew it was real. And then they expect us to say, now they want us to believe that Joe Biden was fine. Now we know he wasn't fine. So where is your credibility? Listen to Chuck Todd when asked about the laptop, remember?
Instead of Roger Stone and WikiLeaks, it's Rudy Giuliani and some computer guy in Delaware. So this didn't work, so he'll try another planted story or another, Russian use some other, discredited Russian propaganda. And for those of you spreading misinformation, shame on you. Shame on you. I don't know how some of you sleep at night who are doing this for a living on television.
Listen how angry he is. He really thought that the laptop wasn't real. We knew it was real. What we have to do is say, Mr. President, is this your laptop? Because I'm about to go on the air. Or Mr. Vice President at the time, I'm about to go on the air. Is it yours? Could it be yours? Is some of these emails real? But no one made any of those efforts, including the 52 intel agents that swore it was Russian disinformation.
A lot of discussion right now about why Fox News and other, right-wing alternative media podcasting, why are they doing so well right now? Well, that's exactly their answer. The American people have been lied to over and over and over and over again. They would rather listen to a comedian on a podcast or Joe Rogan, or they would rather certainly watch Fox News than be lied to by all these people who shamed them for simply asking questions. You can't ask about Joe. You can't ask about COVID. You can't ask about vaccines. You can't ask about the laptop. You can't ask about the lab leak theory. They told us all these things were off limits. They lied to us. And now they wonder why people don't want to watch them anymore. Well, I have a few hundred reasons why.
So is there any doubt in your mind that the next person to emerge has to be separate from anyone we've been dealing with? I mean, Bernie, obviously too old. AOC is too sullied. All these other people have been in and around Joe Biden. The next person to emerge on the left has to come out, I think, of the wilderness. Right? To. I mean, it's got to be some mayor we don't know or some a lieutenant governor that hasn't established themselves yet.
Nobody that was around Joe Biden, and that includes Pete Buttigieg, nobody that was around Biden that experienced that has any credibility or any shot. None of them. That includes Gavin, Whitmer, all of them. They're all out. It's got to be somebody that's complete unknown. They're waiting in the wings. They're going to wait a couple of years. They don't want to be associated with the Democrat Party right now. There will be some kind of a movement, and that person will have to be very honest and say, yes, Joe Biden was failing. But the Democrat Party is probably going to snuff that person out too. You know what's interesting is I almost think the analogy is Iraq. Because do you remember that people were so upset about Iraq and whether they're saying that we should not have voted the 70 senators that voted for Iraq? So Hillary Clinton was vulnerable because this young senator, who's been there for 2 years, came out against Iraq. Even though we never found that tape, we never found his state Senate stand, he kept saying, I was never for the Iraq war. You have to find somebody on the left that said, I never believed the Russia thing. I always believed the laptop was real, and I never thought Joe Biden should have been president. I don't know if anybody can find that person. Or I don't believe that criminal illegal aliens should be out and about walking amongst us. That would be another great one. But then you're essentially a Republican at that point. I know. At some point. I mean, I have to make sure the murderers and rapists are being treated well in prison. That's how I want to, if I'm the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, that's why I want to go to prison. I'm standing up for illegals. Yeah. So you're essentially a Republican. So it's going to be various degrees of Republican conservatives running in 2028. So I have this thing on my sheet that says she has to be out by 11:45. And you know what time it is? Is it 11:45? It's sad. Well, they're calling for me down there. I got to get mic'd up.
Outnumbered.
Got to get on the couch.
All right. Costume change or no?
No. This is all you're getting. This is the olive I was requested to wear today.
Right. Oh, you hit your color wheel?
Yes.
Okay. I did not get the olive request. I don't think I could have. I don't think I own olive, but in the future I will, just in case. Tomi Lahren, thanks so much. We'll watch you in 15 minutes on Outnumbered.
Perfect.
All right. Back in a moment. Hey, we're back. Julie Banderas is here, author of a brand new book, A Monumental Mistake, which is geared towards children, right?
Yeah, it is. But you know what? Every adult in America needs to read it because it teaches respect. And a lot of adults in this country, I'd say the majority, seem to lack that these days.
I mean, mostly Democrats. They're cursing a lot.
It's terrible.
Right?
I mean, well, they're cursing. Yeah, that's the tip of the iceberg. I mean,
Right.
Brian doesn't curse. I've never seen you say a bad word, actually, ever.
No, I find it therapeutic.
Like darn. You'll say that every once in a while. I mean, you don't say that, right?
I'd like to paint that picture, but it wouldn't be an accurate one.
That's sweet.
Right.
You should just lie and say it
Right.
because that's my image of you.
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, the reason I wrote the book is because, there's a lack of respect in this country. There's a lack of respect, obviously, among children. I mean, when's the last time that you saw a child disrespect another child, or another authority figure or their parent, And so disrespect is obviously an issue, and it grows into a much bigger problem. You look at all the protests in this country. Those are college students. Those college students weren't kids that long ago. 10 years ago, those were children. Where was the ball dropped? Obviously, the parents are dropping the ball. So that's why I came up with the book and idea, and hopefully we can save our next generation. Bravebooks.com is where you can pick it up.
That's it. Just go to bravebooks.com.
Bravebooks.com, yeah.
Okay, great. And it's geared to what age?
I would say up to age 90, 95, 99. I'd say max out at 99.
You do not want to see people 100 years old reading the book.
Yes, I do. They will love it. They'll like the pictures. They probably won't be able to read. It would be a great book for Joe Biden.
Right.
I think he would like it.
Right. Would he even know what a book is?
Well, it also teaches you not to lie. So I think he might want to read it.
Well, I'll put it this way. There's 3 stories. The Russia, 2.5 years, multi-million dollars.
Yeah.
Total lie. Robert Mueller found it out. They love Robert Mueller. Okay. Then we all agree maybe that was a dry hole. Then we have the laptop. It's absolutely not real. How dare you? That's a flat out lie. A few months later, everybody knows what we said. And the biggest one is Joe Biden's fine. Now we know he wasn't close to fine. And they pretend as if it caught everybody by surprise now that the 3rd book is coming out.
It's not a surprise. That's what's sad. I mean, it's disturbing as heck that the fact that these aides were trying to keep lawmakers from actually having anything to do with Biden in order to protect him and the truth from coming out. But is it a surprise? No, it's not. What is really disturbing is that there are so many more lies that we don't know about. And I'm hoping finally an investigation does go into this so that we find out who's behind the cover-up. Because this is probably one of the biggest cover-ups in Washington history.
Well, everyone's behind it. Here's Hakeem Jeffries. They're desperately trying to move past it. Cut 32.
Mr. Jeffries, were Democrats being straight with the American public about Joe Biden's condition when you're all defending him last year?
House Democrats have been very clear. We're moving forward. We're not looking backward. And we supported Joe Biden's decision to pass the baton to Vice President Kamala Harris.
But should there be any accountability for that? Given that
the voters. Yes, the voters are able to determine accountability. And the way that they do it in terms of who has the right vision for the party moving forward is through elections.
They're not going to be able to get past, continue to say, we're not looking back. That's what Chuck Schumer says. That's what everyone's trying to say. Ro Khanna at least brought it up and said, we do have to look at this. He says, do you have Ro Khanna from yesterday, Eric, if you found it? And then the follow-up. At first he says he's great. Now he says, well, I had no idea. Is that going to fly?
No, it's not. Hakeem Jeffries, first of all, is singly one of the many Democrats responsible.
Who saw them probably regularly.
Knew about this from the very get-go, and it was his word, actually, that helped finally push along Kamala Harris's campaign. They were waiting to hear from him, and you know that he knew what was going on behind the scenes. He was just waiting for the green light to say, oh, can we tell the truth now? Okay, fine. Yeah, let's get Kamala Harris in there because Joe Biden clearly is incapable.
Right, here's Ro Khanna. Was this the before? Yeah, this is before. Listen to him. He was asked a year ago.
Okay.
Biden seeking re-election?
Absolutely. I've seen the president twice in the last 2 weeks. I've had a conversation with him. He's completely mentally sharp. When the president is out there, he's at his best. Have him debate in the general election. I don't think Donald Trump will. I have spoken with the president. He is fully coherent. He is on top of details when I have talked to him.
So told BS because of this.
Were you telling the truth back then?
I was. I have met him a few times at public events, and he was. But of course, I didn't have the full picture. I mean, I met him maybe 2 times on rope lines. And
Wait, what? He didn't have the full picture.
2 times on rope lines.
Wait a second, but they said, oh no, they talk to him all the time. He seems
did.
Perfectly fine. They believe him. The fact that his aides shielded him from these cabinet members that were wary as well. I mean, how is it that the word didn't trickle down to the media, to the mainstream media who knew that he was not okay? I mean, all of these Democrats wanted to protect him not only in the White House but in the media because they didn't want to get Trump elected and they didn't want to help Trump get elected, and that's why they protected Biden.
I mean, it just goes to show you should not cheat because you cheated.
You'll get caught.
And you forced, Clyburn forced everybody to accept Biden because he didn't want Bernie Sanders. And then they said, you better take a woman of color, and you took Kamala Harris. She was the only one there, and they totally incompetent, prevented them from turning the page. And then you end up with a Titanic loss. Julie, when are we going to see you on TV today?
Oh, God. Fox Noticias this afternoon. Then I'm going to be on Will Cain this afternoon. Then I'll be on a bunch of other shows.
Everyone has known that the SALT issue is one of the big ones that we have to resolve. It's one of the key pieces of this equation to sort of meet the equilibrium point that everybody can be satisfied with. Not everybody's going to be delighted with every provision in a bill this large.
So that is the Speaker of the House trying to make sense of the turbulence they're having with a lot of the Republicans in blue states that want to be able to write off their state taxes. Joining us now is Congressman Jason Smith, Chairman of Ways and Means. Chairman, you got your hands full. It's an exciting time. You want to get this done by Memorial Day. What concerns you most?
You know, Brian, the whole process has been trying to thread a needle with a very razor-thin majority in the House and the Senate. And you look at there are several issues going into this process that we were going to have to balance. And one was the state and local tax deduction. There's members of the Republican conference that has been advocating complete elimination. That means you can't even deduct $1. And then there's others that have been advocating for an unlimited deduction. So we have to thread that needle. It's the same way with all the IRA green credits. We have members that want to rip them all out by the roots immediately, and there's others that want to use a scalpel approach. So we've been doing that balance. The bill that we passed out of the House Ways and Means Committee this week, after 18 hours of deliberation, I feel like is a fair balance. When it comes to the state and local tax that you're referring to, we increased it by 300%. And whenever we compared a $30,000 state and local tax deduction to the Republican members from SALT states like New York, California, and New Jersey, we found that more than 90% of all their constituents would be covered under the provisions within the Ways and Means. But we know that this process, we got to continue to help balance the different ends of the conference, but failure is not an option. We will deliver this tax package, which will lead to such extremely pro-growth tax policies that will turn our economy around.
Here's Senator Rand Paul, not happy. Cut 24.
The problem is it's asking conservatives like myself to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. That's historic. No one's ever raised the debt ceiling that much. It will be a record for Congress to raise the debt $5 trillion.
So that's roughly where he's going. Is he right?
So I don't know where he's getting the number $5 trillion, because the bill that was passed out of the Ways and Means Committee is $4 trillion. And that is to raise the debt ceiling. It's exactly what was in the budget resolution with the instructions for the House to do. The debt ceiling has always been a problem. Both parties hate the debt ceiling, but you do not want to default on your payments. And so what we've looked at, just within our tax bill, we've cut more than $1.5 trillion of spending. That is 300% more than what's ever been cut by any Congress. Would I like to cut more? Of course, because we have a spending problem in this country. It's not a revenue problem. It is strictly a spending problem. Unfortunately, our counterparts like to raise taxes, and they would love for the expiration of Trump's successful tax cuts that would lead to a 22% tax increase on every single American.
Chairman, the big thing is Medicaid. We know Barack Obama destroyed it by inflating the amount of people eligible for it and put the federal government on the hook to pay it. But that is your mess that you inherited. How can you reform without giving out the perception that you don't like poor people?
There's definitely Medicaid reforms that can create a lot of savings, especially whenever you require work requirements for able-bodied, healthy adults. By doing that, the savings is exponential. There's other items that you can find savings just within the Ways and Means Committee. $1 trillion worth of savings. So we've been able to find it, whether it's in the Education and Workforce Committee, whether it's in the Ag Committee, or whether it's in the Energy and Commerce or Ways and Means Committee. We're pulling those all together, and the savings are going to be real.
Do you believe we're going to get a vote out of the Energy Committee today?
The Budget Committee is meeting today,
Committee.
I absolutely believe, before I became chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, I was the Republican leader of the House Budget Committee. I'm confident that they will not stall this process. They'll continue to move. Of course, there's going to be bumps along the way. I'm scheduled to be before the Rules Committee on Monday so that we can ultimately have the bill on the floor this week before Memorial Day.
And that's still a possibility? Do you think the president's got to get involved?
You know, the president is the most engaging executive that I have ever worked with. President Trump has no problem calling me whenever he has a tax question or a tax idea or trade. And so I'm sure he will be engaged because the one big beautiful bill, once we get this accomplished, this will be the biggest legislative feat that myself or any of my colleagues will have ever been involved in.
And no taxes on tips, no taxes on car loans that could help that business. You bring in some trade deals, and the numbers have been strong when it comes to the CPI and jobs. So this could be an exciting summer, but you guys got a lot of work to do yet. Thanks so much for letting our audience know what's happening, Chairman. Appreciate it. Best of luck to you hit your Memorial Day deadline.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
All right. Works really hard. Extremely bright guy. Julie Banderas is next. We'll discuss this as well as the president's trip. We didn't even bring up what else is going on.